like they said, my name is Misha Ruby Cristobal. I'm really honored to be here, but before I get started with my lightning talk, I would like to take a moment of silence in memory of my parents and everyone who we seem to be losing way too soon. Thank you for indulging me in that moment. I hope that it also brought you some comfort like it did for me. But let's get back on track. I really wanted to present this lightning talk because going beyond the design handoff and developing a better relationship with my designer counterparts has been an absolute game changer for me, especially as a UX engineer. At Cisco, we have this thing called a UX engineer, which is basically just a front-end developer who's more concerned about building block components rather than full-out features. As a UX engineer, my main deliverables are reusable components, and the product front-end engineers can just pick from there and build out features at a faster pace. My bread and butter is still the same as you and other developers. Essentially, I write and research a lot of code. What could be different in my work week is the time that I spend partnering with our design system teams. So together, we create accessible, scalable, and delightful user experiences that we deliver through our component library. This partnership wasn't always a given, though. We had to work together with the shared belief that our relationship should go beyond and doesn't end or start at just a design handoff. By establishing a more dynamic working relationship, both of our teams' productivity have vastly improved, and it's led to better product and just more fulfilling and fun collaborations. So, how were we able to accomplish this? Fortunately, it's actually quite simple. Essentially, it comes down to three big actionable ideas. The first is to review your mockups way earlier. If the first time you're seeing a design is when it's 100% ready and it's being handed to you for development, that's way too late. In my experience, the sweet spot is this arbitrary 75% done. It's basically when the designer is done making decisions about the interaction and the component skeleton, but there's still some wiggle room for actionable conversations. For example, when we were building out a file upload component, the designer and I met after they've mocked a general skeleton and the various states. However, there are some key interactions that we opened up for discussion. We talked about whether errors should block completely, meaning the user will need to restart, or whether errors should fail more gracefully and let the user deal with it on a case-by-case basis. As you can imagine, these two scenarios beget very different implementations. If I didn't have this conversation at this stage, I would have either over-engineered the component or worse, need to redo it, re-architect the whole thing, and delay our product feature. But how do you get started on having these conversations with the designer? It's actually so simple as just messaging them. I think you'd be very surprised with how excited they will be when you reach out about this. If you're not sure how to start the message, you can use something like, hey, can I get a preview of what you're working on? Don't worry about it being polished. I just want to get an early discussion and exchange some ideas. The second idea is really crucial to the success of the first idea, and this is to restrain your doer brain. We've all been there before, right? Your designer is showing you this cool new feature, and your brain starts checking out. How am I going to build this? What will I do? Blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. Restrain that doer brain and just be curious and present about the process. Your designer isn't showing you the mockup as a formality. This is something that they really care about. They want to hear about your feedback. Some questions that you can ask them are, why did you choose this interaction over that one? What's the user trying to accomplish? What happens on the happy path? What about the unsuccessful path? Have we designed something similar to this before? What other use cases have you considered? Whenever I skip this step, I inevitably, as I am coding, I'll reach a point where I need to ask my designer about a use case that we just hadn't covered. I have to pause, wait for the response. At best, this will slow me down a few hours. At worst, I'm stuck waiting for days because my designer is either supporting 10 different teams or taking a well-deserved break. This has happened to me enough times to make me really value the time we have for design reviews. I now always come prepared with a curious mindset and ask a lot of questions. Honestly, we have a really great time. In my experience, every designer I have worked with have felt flattered and excited to tell me about their why. Like why that interaction, why a line this way, why a radio and not a switch, etc., etc. Over time, these conversations made me realize the third and final idea. My perception of design and designer were wrong. In my experience, when it comes to design, an engineer's perspective falls into one of these two buckets. Design is vague and subjective. Designers create based on solely what they think looks good. Design is mysterious. Designers create based on knowledge that I will never have or ever understand. Depending on the day in the project, I was either in bucket A, B, or a little bit of both. I thought that developer designer relationships was magic that I just didn't have available. Like those Medium posts you see that talk about these lofty culture goals that maybe 1% of us can actually make a reality. But the reality is actually very different. A very extremely hot take of the day, the Venn diagram between developers and designers is basically a circle. At our cores, we're all problem solvers. We're all just trying to help a user do something. The only difference is that, hello, did I lose you? The only difference is that developers use code and designers use vectors. Just as we would pick a library based on our engineering experience, so would a designer pick the right element based on their knowledge. I know I used this graphic earlier, but I want to emphasize it here again. Rather than thinking about design as being vague or out of reach, think about it as a toolkit that a designer pulls from based on their experience and judgment. Just as you would choose a queue versus a stack, so would the designer choose a radio over a checkbox. At the end of the day, co-creating with the designer really isn't about giving your opinion on alignment or border radius. It's a lot deeper than that. It's about partnering on the shared goal of empowering users to do their task in a beautiful, intuitive way. And don't you think that should go beyond the design handoff? Thank you.